The Oval Office air crackled with barely suppressed fury. President Donald Trump, his face a mask of thunderous disbelief, slammed a thick briefing document onto his mahogany desk. "Leavitt," he bellowed, the sound echoing through the usually composed space. "Get in here." Karoline Leavitt, White House press secretary, walked in with a practiced calm that belied the knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. News of the leaked classified document regarding the administration's immigration overhaul had sent shockwaves through the West Wing, and the fallout was already catastrophic. CNN was running the story on a relentless loop, framing the proposed policy as inhumane and xenophobic, fueling a firestorm of public outrage and political condemnation. "This," President Trump growled, thrusting a tablet displaying CNN's headline towards her, "this is a direct attack. They're trying to undermine everything we built. And your job, Karoline, is to fix it? Now." Hours later, under the harsh glare of the White House briefing room lights, Karoline faced the hungry wolves of the press corps. The tension was palpable, a thick blanket of anticipation and hostility. Cameras flashed incessantly, microphones jostled for position, and the air hummed with the nervous energy of a room poised for a fight. This was her arena, the stage where her carefully crafted words could either quell the storm or fan its flames. Jonathan Lee, CNN's veteran White House correspondent, a man whose reputation for incisive questioning preceded him, rose to his feet. His eyes, sharp and unwavering, locked onto Karoline's. "Ms. Leavitt," he began, his voice carrying a note of barely concealed triumph, "can the administration definitively deny the authenticity of this leaked document detailing plans for mass deportations? And if it is indeed genuine, how does the president reconcile such a policy with the values of this nation, a nation built by immigrants?" Karoline met his gaze unflinchingly. Years of navigating the treacherous currents of Washington had honed her skills, forging a steely resolve beneath her polished exterior. "Mr. Lee," she replied, her voice steady and measured, "the document you refer to is indeed a draft proposal that was under internal review. However, its unauthorized disclosure, clearly intended to create maximum disruption and sow discord, is a matter of serious concern. The President's commitment to securing our borders is unwavering, but it is equally matched by his compassion and respect for the rule of law." She deftly pivoted, turning the focus back on CNN. "Furthermore, the manner in which this classified information was obtained raises serious ethical and potentially legal questions. We are launching a full internal investigation to determine the source of this leak." She fielded a barrage of follow-up questions with practiced ease, parrying accusations and deflecting attempts to corner her. Despite her confident performance, a nagging unease lingered. She knew the leak hadn't been accidental, it was a calculated strike, launched from within the very walls of the White House. Someone she worked with, someone she perhaps even trusted, had betrayed them. As the briefing concluded and the reporters dispersed, a figure emerged from the shadows near the exit. Jack Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, a man known for his hawkish views and his network of shadowy contacts, approached her. His expression was grave. "Karoline," he said, his voice low and warning, "you handled that well. But be careful. There are forces at play here you may not understand. And you, in particular, are being watched." His words sent a chill down her spine, confirming her deepest fears. Later that evening, alone in her dimly lit office, the weight of the day pressed down on her. Her phone buzzed with a new message. An unknown number. Hesitantly, she opened it. The single line of text sent a jolt of icy dread through her veins. "If you continue to investigate, someone will die." The anonymous thread hung heavy in the air, a palpable weight that shadowed Karoline's every thought. Despite the fear that gnawed at her, a fierce determination ignited within her. She couldn't back down. The integrity of the White House, and perhaps even the nation, was at stake. Her first step was to trace the leak. She enlisted the help of Michael Reed, her trusted communications advisor, a tech-savvy and discreet operator. Together, they delved into the digital footprints, sifting through server logs and communication records. Michael, with his quiet efficiency and unwavering loyalty, became her anchor in the swirling storm of suspicion. Their initial findings pointed to an internal phone call made just hours before the document surfaced on CNN. The call originated from a secure line within the West Wing. Narrowing down the possibilities, Karoline started scrutinizing the behavior of her colleagues. During a tense cabinet meeting, the topic of the immigration policy inevitably arose. David Holt, the White House Chief of Staff, a man known for his pragmatic approach and seemingly unflappable demeanor, surprisingly voiced his reservations. "Mr. President," he said, his tone measured, "given the current public outcry and the potential for long-term damage to our reputation, perhaps it would be prudent to reconsider the immediate implementation of this plan." His words, seemingly reasonable, planted a seed of suspicion in Karoline's mind. Holt had always been a staunch supporter of the president's agenda. This sudden shift felt calculated. Meanwhile, Karoline discreetly reached out to Jessica Miller, a highly regarded agent within the FBI's counterintelligence division. They had a history, a mutual respect forged during a previous crisis. Karoline, careful not to reveal classified information, requested Jessica's unofficial assistance in monitoring Jack Sullivan. His cryptic warning had been too pointed, his presence too ominous to ignore. Jessica, a sharp and perceptive operative, agreed to look into Sullivan's activities without raising any red flags within the Bureau. She began subtly tracking his movements, his meetings, and his communications. The pressure on Karoline intensified. Anonymous emails, mirroring the chilling message on her phone, began appearing in her inbox. Each one a thinly veiled threat, a constant reminder of the danger she was courting. One afternoon, as she was reviewing security footage from the day of the leak, her office door creaked open. Jack Sullivan stood there, his eyes like chips of ice. "Leavitt," he said, his voice a low growl, "I warned you. Some things are best left buried. You're treading on dangerous ground. There are forces far larger than you at play here. Walk away while you still can." His words, instead of intimidating her, only strengthened her resolve. His fear was palpable, suggesting he wasn't the puppet master, but a player controlled by someone else. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly starting to come together, but the picture remained blurry and dangerous. The leak, Holt's unexpected caution, Sullivan's veiled threats, they were all connected, but the nature of that connection remained elusive. The day ended with Jessica Miller's encrypted message flashing on Karoline's secure phone. The message was brief, but its implications were explosive. "Sullivan met with a known Russian operative at a private party last night." The revelation of Jack Sullivan's clandestine meeting with the Russian operative sent a shockwave through Karoline's already strained nerves. The stakes had just been raised exponentially. This wasn't just about political maneuvering within the White House, it hinted at foreign interference, a potential threat to national security. An invitation to a high-level diplomatic reception provided Karoline with an opportunity to confront Sullivan directly. She navigated the crowded ballroom, her eyes scanning the sea of powerful faces until she spotted him, a solitary figure near the dimly lit terrace. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, her voice cool and steady as she approached him. He turned, his expression hardening when he saw her. "Ms. Leavitt," he replied, his tone laced with thinly veiled hostility. "I thought I made myself clear." "You did," Karoline countered, "but your advice seems increasingly self-serving. Your meeting last night, with your Russian friend. Care to explain that?" Sullivan's face paled slightly, a flicker of panic in his eyes before he regained his composure. "You're out of your depth, Karoline. You don't know what you're dealing with." Then came the twist, a brutal, unexpected blow that momentarily knocked the wind out of her. "You want to know why I warned you off?" Sullivan sneered, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. It's about your brother, Jake. He died because of this administration. A mistake. They let the man who killed him into this country. Covered it up. And now you're digging into secrets that will expose their incompetence, and reopen old wounds for you. Karoline recoiled as if struck. Jake. His death years ago had been a devastating blow, a wound that had never fully healed. The official explanation had been a random act of violence. Sullivan's words painted a far more sinister picture, one implicating the very institution she served. Don't you see? Sullivan pressed, his eyes glinting with a twisted sense of justification. They used your brother's death to keep things quiet. And now you're threatening to unravel it all. Stop, Karoline. For your own sake. The encounter left her reeling. Was it possible? Could the administration have been responsible, even indirectly, for Jake's death? The thought was sickening. Sullivan used this devastating information as a weapon, a cruel attempt to silence her investigation. Later that week, Karoline had a private meeting with President Trump. She carefully broached the subject of the leak, omitting Sullivan's revelation about Jake. The president listened intently, his expression unreadable. Karoline, he said finally, his voice surprisingly gentle, this town is full of vipers. Trust no one. Focus on the big picture. We have important work to do. His words offered no comfort, only a vague sense of foreboding. Just as Karoline began to process Sullivan's shocking disclosure and the president's cryptic warning, Jonathan Lee's byline appeared on a bombshell article. Fueled by carefully curated leaks, the story painted Karoline as a ruthless operative, complicit in the administration's alleged cover-up of Jake's death and the controversial immigration policy. The article insinuated that she was using her brother's tragedy to gain sympathy while ruthlessly enforcing the president's agenda. The public backlash was swift and brutal. Karoline's reputation, once carefully cultivated, was now in tatters. That night, another anonymous message arrived. This time, it was a photograph. A grainy image of Jake, taken years ago, smiling broadly. Below the picture, a single, chilling question, you want to know the truth, don't you? The photograph of Jake felt like a punch to the gut, a cruel reminder of her loss and the lingering questions surrounding his death. The anonymous messages, coupled with Jonathan Lee's damaging article, had created a suffocating atmosphere of suspicion and hostility around Karoline. She felt isolated, unsure who to trust. Her paranoia proved to be well-founded. One morning, Michael informed her that her computer system had been breached. Someone had remotely accessed her files, likely searching for evidence related to her investigation or planting disinformation. The intrusion was sophisticated, leaving few traces, a hallmark of a highly skilled operative. The attacks weren't just digital. Jessica Miller, while tailing Jack Sullivan as discreetly as possible, was violently assaulted in a seemingly random mugging. She sustained serious injuries and was forced to go underground, severing her contact with Karoline. The timing was too convenient to be a coincidence. Someone knew Jessica was investigating Sullivan and wanted her silenced. The threats then turned closer to home. Michael Reed was accosted on his way home from work one evening. Two shadowy figures cornered him in a dark alley, their faces obscured by the dim light. They didn't steal anything, their message was far more chilling. Tell Karoline to back off, one of them hissed, pressing a cold, metallic object against his ribs. This isn't worth dying for. The escalating attacks made it clear that the forces arrayed against Karoline were powerful and ruthless, capable of operating both in the digital realm and the physical world. The tentacles of this conspiracy reached deep within the corridors of power. Then came another unexpected revelation. Before being taken into custody following Jessica's report about his meeting with the Russian operative, Jack Sullivan managed to get a message to Karoline through a trusted, albeit reluctant, intermediary. The message was cryptic but pointed, "Hold. He's the key." I was just a pawn. David Holt. The seemingly level-headed chief of staff, the voice of caution in the cabinet meeting. Sullivan's dying words, coupled with Holt's earlier suspicious behavior, suddenly clicked into place. Holt wasn't trying to de-escalate the situation, he was trying to control the narrative, perhaps even protect himself. That night, sifting through the remnants of the digital attack on her computer, Karoline discovered a hidden file, expertly concealed within seemingly innocuous system logs. It was an encrypted document. After hours of painstaking work, Michael managed to crack the encryption. The contents sent a chill deeper than any threat she had received before. It was a heavily redacted letter, clearly originating from Moscow, detailing a complex operation involving the infiltration of the highest levels of the U.S. government and mentioning David Holt by name. The letter from Moscow confirmed Karoline's worst fears. David Holt was a compromised asset, a mole operating at the very heart of the White House. The implications were staggering. The leak, the threats, the attacks, they were all part of a larger, more sinister game orchestrated by a foreign power through Holt. Karoline knew she had to act quickly and decisively. Holt was powerful and well-connected. A direct confrontation without irrefutable evidence would be suicide. She needed a plan, a way to expose him without alerting him to her knowledge. Working in utmost secrecy with Michael, Karoline devised a carefully crafted trap. They created a fake briefing document outlining a fabricated plan for an immediate and large-scale deployment of troops to the southern border. The details were designed to be inflammatory, guaranteed to attract attention if leaked. They deliberately included subtle inconsistencies and watermarks that could trace the document back to its source. Karoline then scheduled a small, highly confidential meeting with a select group of senior staff, including David Holt, under the guise of discussing border security measures. The fake briefing document was circulated, ostensibly for their review. The waiting was agonizing. Karoline watched Holt closely during the meeting, his demeanor seemingly normal, betraying no hint of his treachery. But beneath the surface, she sensed a subtle shift, a heightened alertness in his eyes. Exactly 12 hours later, as predicted, the fabricated details of the troop deployment appeared on CNN. The leak was undeniable, the information too specific to have originated from anywhere outside that confidential meeting. The watermarks embedded in the digital version of the document confirmed their suspicions. The file had been accessed and copied from David Holt's secure server. The evidence was irrefutable. Karoline, with Michael by her side, marched directly to Holt's office. He looked up in surprise as they entered, his usual composed facade faltering slightly. "David," Karoline said, her voice cold and resolute, "we need to talk." Holt's eyes flickered with unease. "Karoline? What is it?" "The leak," she stated plainly, placing a printed copy of the CNN article alongside the traced digital watermark on his desk. "The fake troop deployment plan. It was leaked from your server, David." "We know." Holt's face drained of color. He tried to bluster, to deny, but the evidence was too damning. Karoline pressed her advantage. "You betrayed this administration, David. You betrayed this country. And I will expose you to the entire world." Within the hour, FBI agents, alerted by Karoline with the irrefutable proof, arrived at the White House and placed David Holt under arrest. The initial shockwaves rippled through the West Wing, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. The traitor within their ranks had been unmasked. Or so it seemed. The arrest of David Holt brought a superficial sense of closure, a feeling that the immediate crisis had been averted. But for Karoline, the relief was short-lived. Jack Sullivan's final message echoed in her mind, "Holt. He's the key. I was just a pawn." If Holt was merely a pawn, then who was controlling the game? Karoline pressed the FBI to investigate Holt's connections, his communications, everything that might lead them to the puppet master. Sullivan, before his own apprehension, had hinted at a larger organization, a shadowy network manipulating the levers of power from behind the scenes. As the investigation into Holt deepened, unsettling patterns began to emerge. His financial records showed a series of large, unexplained transfers from offshore accounts. His communication logs revealed encrypted exchanges with unknown individuals. The deeper they dug, the more it became clear that Holt wasn't acting alone. The backlash against Karoline for her role in exposing Holt was intense. While some lauded her courage, others accused her of orchestrating a political witch hunt. The media was divided, fueling further speculation and uncertainty. One evening, as Karoline and Michael were leaving the White House, their car was suddenly forced off the road by a black SUV. Masked figures emerged, their movements swift and menacing. They weren't after information, they were after Karoline. Michael fought back fiercely, buying her precious seconds to escape. The attackers eventually retreated, leaving Michael with minor injuries but shaken. The incident served as a stark reminder that the danger was far from over. Amidst the turmoil, there was one unexpected development. Jonathan Lee, vindicated by the exposure of Holt's treachery and the subsequent confirmation of the initial leak's accuracy, was reinstated by CNN. He even reached out to Karoline, offering a tentative truce. The enemy of his enemy, it seemed, was now an uneasy ally. Just as the dust seemed to be settling, Karoline received another anonymous message. This one was different, devoid of threats, yet far more unsettling. David Holt was a sacrifice. The game has just begun. The chilling message confirmed Karoline's deepest fears. The unmasking of Holt was merely a chapter in a much larger, more dangerous game. The true orchestrator remained hidden, pulling strings from the shadows. Trust, she realized, was a luxury she could no longer afford. Then came the devastating blow. Information surfaced, meticulously planted and strategically leaked, pointing to Michael Reed as a double agent. The evidence, though circumstantial, was damning: encrypted communications mirroring Holt's, unexplained financial transactions, and even veiled accusations from within the intelligence community. The narrative painted Michael as the architect of the initial leak, using Karoline's investigation as a smokescreen to protect himself and his handlers. The media pounced. Karoline, who had just been hailed as a hero for exposing Holt, was now facing accusations of being either incredibly naive or, worse, complicit in a larger conspiracy. The public trust she had painstakingly rebuilt crumbled once more. To add to the maelstrom, news arrived from the prison: Jack Sullivan was dead. The official report cited a sudden heart attack, but Karoline couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just a coincidence. Along with the news of his death came another message, delivered through the same reluctant intermediary: the one you trust the most is the one who betrayed you. The words hit Karoline like a physical blow. The carefully constructed wall of trust she had built around Michael shattered into a million pieces. The pieces of the puzzle, once scattered and confusing, now clicked into a horrifying configuration. Michael's unwavering loyalty, his quiet efficiency, his constant presence by her side, it all took on a sinister new meaning. The confrontation was inevitable. Karoline summoned Michael to her office. He walked in, his usual calm demeanor slightly strained but betraying no overt signs of guilt. "Michael," Karoline began, her voice trembling slightly, "I need to ask you something. Something very important." She laid out the evidence, the whispers she had heard, the inconsistencies she had noticed in his behavior. As she spoke, a subtle change came over Michael's face. The mask of loyalty began to slip, revealing a chillingly cold and calculating gaze beneath. When she finally finished, the silence in the room was deafening. Michael simply smiled, a slow, unsettling curve of his lips. "You're right, Karoline," he said, his voice soft but laced with an unsettling confidence. "I wasn't betraying you. I was merely being loyal, to someone more powerful." Michael's confession hung in the air, a venomous cloud suffocating Karoline's senses. The betrayal cut deeper than any threat, any political attack. He had been her confidant, her ally, the one person she thought she could trust in the viper's nest of Washington. Despite the shock and hurt, Karoline knew she couldn't afford to succumb to despair. She had to act, and quickly. Michael was a dangerous operative, deeply embedded within the network that had infiltrated the White House. Gathering what little strength she had left, Karoline orchestrated Michael's exposure. She meticulously compiled the evidence against him, leveraging the information she had gathered during her investigation and the damning clues that had recently surfaced. Working with the remaining loyal members of her staff, she leaked the information to Jonathan Lee, knowing that the veteran journalist, now an uneasy ally, would ensure its widespread dissemination. The fallout was immediate and explosive. Michael Reed, the trusted advisor, was revealed to be a mole, a double agent working for foreign interests. The revelation sent shockwaves through the administration and the nation. Michael was swiftly apprehended by the FBI. As he was being led away, his eyes met Karoline's. There was no remorse in his gaze, only a chilling certainty. "You may have won this round, Karoline," he said, his voice low and menacing, "but the one who orchestrated all of this is still out there. And they will not forget this." Despite Michael's capture and the apparent unraveling of the conspiracy, Karoline couldn't shake the feeling that he was right. The puppet master remained unseen, untouchable. That night, a new message arrived on her secure phone. It was from the same unknown number that had sent her the initial threats and the photograph of Jake. This time, the message was simply a location and a time. A clandestine meeting. Torn between caution and a desperate need for answers, Karoline decided to attend the clandestine meeting. She knew it was a risk, potentially a trap, but the possibility of finally confronting the individual pulling the strings was too compelling to ignore. She arrived at the deserted location, a dimly lit parking garage on the outskirts of the city, at the appointed time. A lone figure emerged from the shadows, their face obscured by the darkness. "You wanted to know who was in control, Ms. Leavitt," a voice said, smooth and cultured, sending a shiver down her spine. The voice was familiar, yet she couldn't quite place it. As the figure stepped into a sliver of light, Karoline's breath caught in her throat. Standing before her was someone she had trusted implicitly, someone whose presence in this shadowy world seemed utterly impossible. The revelation was a final, devastating twist, shattering the last vestiges of her trust and understanding. Meanwhile, back at the White House, Karoline made a calculated move. Knowing that her every action was likely being monitored, she held a press conference. Facing the assembled media, her expression resolute, she declared, "The attempts to undermine this administration through leaks and disinformation have been uncovered. The individuals responsible have been identified and are being brought to justice. Today, I can confidently say that the game is over." Her words were broadcast across the nation, intended to project an image of victory and control. But beneath her confident facade, a storm raged. She knew the game was far from over. Her declaration was a gamble, a strategic maneuver to provoke the true mastermind into revealing their hand. That evening, her secure phone rang. An unknown number. Hesitantly, she answered. A different voice this time, cold and devoid of emotion, spoke just 3 words before the line went dead: "Be very careful." Karoline stood at the window of her West Wing office, the lights of the city twinkling below like distant, indifferent stars. The events of the past few weeks had left her emotionally and physically drained, yet a new kind of resolve had taken root within her. The arrest of Michael and the exposure of Holt had brought a semblance of peace, but the chilling messages and the unresolved identity of the ultimate puppet master left a lingering unease. The game, she knew, was not truly over. It had merely entered a new, more dangerous phase. The president, briefed on the latest developments, remained outwardly composed, but Karoline detected a flicker of concern in his eyes. The infiltration had gone deeper than anyone had imagined, shaking the very foundations of his administration. As she looked out at the darkened cityscape, her phone buzzed again. A single, encrypted message from an unknown sender. With a deep breath, Karoline decrypted the message. The words that appeared on the screen sent a cold wave of realization through her. The pieces finally clicked into place, revealing the true scope of the conspiracy and the identity of the individual who had been pulling the strings all along. It was someone so deeply entrenched, so seemingly untouchable, that their involvement was almost unbelievable. A faint smile touched Karoline's lips, a mixture of grim understanding and steely determination. The game was far from over. In fact, in this moment of chilling clarity, she finally understood the true nature of the battlefield. The final message echoed in her mind, a silent declaration of the next stage of the conflict: I am the one who controls the game.